The polish of the dining table reflected the cold, untouched plate of food that sat before Arthur. It was a mirror showing a distorted version of his own family, a family that saw him not as a father, but as a relic, a piece of furniture they were unsure what to do with. His son, Leo, swirled the wine in his glass, the crimson liquid catching the light, his gaze fixed on his phone. He hadn't looked at Arthur once since they'd sat down, save for the initial, perfunctory greeting. Across from him, his daughter, Chloe, was engaged in an animated conversation with her husband, Mark, their laughter sharp and brittle in the cavernous dining room of Leo's ostentatiously modern home. They spoke of portfolios, of acquisitions, of a world that spun on an axis of profit and loss, a world Arthur had never belonged to. He sat in the silence they had built around him, a silence more profound than any he had known in the jungles or the deserts of his past. The faint, persistent ache in his left leg, a souvenir from a lifetime ago, was a dull throb that grounded him in the present moment. He watched them, his children, and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. They were planning something. He could feel it in the air, in the way they avoided his eyes, in the strained politeness that was sharper than any overt cruelty. To them, he was just an old man, a stubborn ghost haunting the edges of their successful lives. But they were about to learn that some ghosts cast very long shadows. What you are about to witness is a story that cuts to the very bone of respect, honor, and the hidden legacies that walk among us every single day. We bring you these stories not just to entertain, but to remind you of profound truths that often lie dormant beneath the surface of the ordinary. Before we delve into the heart of this family's reckoning, we want to welcome you to our channel. If you believe in the power of stories to reveal character and illuminate the human condition, consider joining our community. Your engagement, your comments, and your subscriptions allow us to continue searching for these powerful narratives. Now, let us return to that cold dining room, where a plan forged in greed was about to collide with a past forged in fire and sacrifice. The disrespect was a physical presence at the table, a guest no one had invited, but everyone had made room for. Leo finally put down his phone, a sigh of performative exasperation escaping his lips. "Dad," he began, the word carrying the weight of a burden. "We need to talk about the house." Arthur didn't respond. He simply looked at his son, his eyes, which had seen suns rise over landscapes of impossible beauty and unimaginable horror, were steady and unreadable. Chloe jumped in, her voice a carefully modulated tool of persuasion. "What Leo means, Daddy, is that it's just too much for you. A big, old house. The upkeep, the taxes. It's a drain. We found a wonderful assisted living community. It's more like a resort, really. They had rehearsed this. The synchronized talking points, the feigned concern. They saw an old man who needed to be managed, a problem to be solved, so they could liquidate the asset and absorb it into their ever-growing portfolios. The house was the last tangible piece of their mother, the last bastion of Arthur's quiet, ordered life. It was not an asset. It was a sanctuary. It was home, and they were preparing to take it from him, not with force, but with the smiling, condescending cruelty of modern entitlement. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw limp, gray hair and worn-out clothes. They didn't see the steel beneath the skin, the history etched into his very bones, a history hidden in plain sight on the faded, almost invisible tattoo on his forearm that he unconsciously rubbed when the old ache grew worse. The trap was set. The bait was their own father's dignity. But they were about to find out they weren't the hunters. They were the prey. Arthur's life was a testament to the beauty of routine and the dignity of simplicity. His small apartment, the one his children despised and described as depressing, was a haven of meticulous order. Every book on its shelf had been read and reread, their spines softened with use. Every tool in his small workshop was clean and in its designated place. The air smelled of old wood, lemon polish, and the faint, clean scent of the gun oil he used to maintain a piece of his past he kept locked away, not as a weapon, but as a relic of a promise. His day began before the sun, with a series of slow, deliberate stretches to ease the stiffness in his leg, a leg that had carried him across continents, through terrains that would have broken lesser men. The limp was a part of him now, a rhythmic counterpoint to his steady, unhurried pace. He would drink his coffee, black and strong, standing by the window that overlooked a small, well-tended garden. He knew the names of the birds that came to his feeder. He knew the cycle of the seasons not by the calendar, but by the subtle shifts in the light and the feel of the air on his skin. This was the life he had built after the noise had faded, after the uniforms were put away, after the world had asked everything of him and he had given it freely. It was a quiet life, an unassuming life. To his neighbors, he was Mr. Peterson, the quiet old gentleman in 2B who always held the door and whose chrysanthemums were the envy of the block. They knew nothing of the man once called Rafe in hushed, reverent tones in classified briefing rooms. They knew nothing of the night spent in darkness, waiting, listening, becoming a part of the shadows. They knew nothing of the lives he had saved, or the burdens he carried in the silent chambers of his heart. And that was how he wanted it. His heroism was not a trophy to be displayed. It was a private knowledge, a pact he had made with his own soul. His children, Leo and Chloe, saw this simplicity not as a choice, but as a failure. Their own lives were a frantic whirlwind of activity, a constant pursuit of more. Their homes were palaces of glass and steel, filled with expensive objects that brought them little joy. Their calendars were packed with meetings and social engagements, yet they were profoundly lonely. They measured their worth in stock prices and social media followers, and by those metrics, their father was a ghost, a non-entity. They could not comprehend a man who desired nothing, who asked for nothing, who was content with the rising of the sun and the quiet satisfaction of a day lived with purpose. They mistook his humility for weakness, his silence for ignorance. They did not know that the faded marking on his forearm, the one they dismissed as a youthful mistake, a crude blue-black smudge of a coiled serpent wrapped around a downward-pointing sword, was an insignia more exclusive than any corporate logo, more potent than any symbol of wealth they could ever hope to acquire. It was a mark of the unit, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of clandestine warfare, a family bound not by blood, but by shared sacrifice. To see it, to truly understand it, was to know that you were in the presence of a legend, but they were blind to it. Their eyes, so sharp when it came to spotting a market trend or a rival's weakness, could not see the history that lived and breathed in the man before them. This blindness, this arrogant ignorance, would be their undoing. They saw a man who had nothing left to give, when in reality, he had already given everything for people, just like them, who would never know the price of their own freedom. The inciting incident, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, clinical execution. It happened a week after the disastrous dinner, on a Tuesday morning. Arthur was pruning the rose bushes in the small garden behind the house his children so desperately wanted to sell. The house was his. It had been his and their mother's, and every corner of it held a memory, a whisper of a life lived with a love that felt like a distant country to him now. He heard the crunch of gravel and looked up to see not one, but two luxury cars pull into his driveway. Leo and Chloe emerged, dressed in sharp business attire, their faces set with a grim determination. They were not alone. With them were two other people, a slick, smiling man in an expensive suit holding a leather portfolio, a real estate agent, and a woman whose severe expression and tailored blazer screamed lawyer. They didn't knock. Leo used a key he still had, a key Arthur's wife had given him years ago, and walked into the house as if he owned it. Chloe gestured for the others to follow, casting a dismissive glance at her father, still holding his pruning shears, soil on his knees. Arthur stood up slowly, the ache in his leg a little sharper than usual. He walked inside, his home already feeling alien, invaded. The real estate agent was already in the living room, tapping on walls, his voice booming as he talked about good bones and renovation potential. The lawyer, a woman named Ms. Albright, had laid out a sheaf of papers on the dining room table where he and his wife had shared thousands of meals. It was a public challenge, a declaration of war disguised as a family intervention. "Dad, this is Rick," Leo said without a hint of apology. "He's the best agent in the state. He's just going to have a look around, give us an appraisal." Chloe chimed in, her voice oozing synthetic sympathy. "And this is Helen Albright. She's here to help us with the transition, to make it all smooth and painless." The word us hung in the air, a clear line drawn in the sand. There was Arthur, and then there was U.S. He was being managed, handled, his life dismantled before his very eyes by the two people he had brought into the world. He looked at the papers on the table. Power of attorney forms, medical directives, contract for the sale of the property. They were here to strip him of his autonomy, piece by piece. Arthur's response was, as always, minimalist and stoic. He looked at Leo, then at Chloe. "This is my home," he said. The 3 words were not a plea, but a statement of fact, as immovable as a mountain. Leo scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "And it's becoming a ruin. Be realistic, Dad. You can't manage it anymore." It was the ultimate humiliation. To be told you are incapable, to be dismissed as a child in your own home, a home paid for with decades of hard work, a home that represented the last anchor to his past. A younger man, a junior associate with a lawyer, a quiet observer named David, stood by the doorway, his face a mask of discomfort. He was new to this, and the naked avarice of children, coupled with the old man's profound, silent dignity, struck a dissonant chord within him. He saw Arthur's hands, callous and strong despite his age. He saw the way he stood, perfectly balanced, despite the limp, and for a fleeting second, as Arthur's sleeve slid up, David caught a glimpse of the strange, dark tattoo on his forearm. It was just a blur, but it seemed out of place, a piece of a different puzzle. He watched as Arthur simply turned, without another word, and walked back out to his garden, leaving his children and their hired professionals to strategize in his living room. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just was. And his silence was more powerful, more damning, than any argument could ever be. He picked up his pruning shears and methodically, carefully, snipped a dead rose from its stem. The battle had begun. The escalation was swift and merciless. Having failed to intimidate him with their initial shock-and-awe tactic, Leo and Chloe shifted their strategy. They decided that if he would not be reasoned with, then he would be delegitimized. Their campaign of disrespect intensified, becoming a daily assault on his peace and his autonomy. The real estate agent, Rick, began showing up unannounced, bringing prospective buyers to walk through Arthur's home. They would open his closets, comment on his furniture, and discuss his life in the past tense, all while he sat in his worn armchair, reading a book. He never acknowledged them. He simply became a part of the house they were trying to sell, a silent, immovable fixture. His presence unnerved them, their loud, sales-driven chatter often faltering into an awkward silence under his steady, quiet gaze. Leo and Chloe saw his passivity as a sign that their plan was working, that he was retreating into himself, defeated. They couldn't have been more wrong. Each intrusion, each condescending remark, was a drop of water on a stone, not wearing away, but hardening it, tempering the steel that lay dormant within. The young lawyer, David, was often present at these invasions, sent by his boss, Ms. Albright, to keep the process moving. Unlike the others, David watched Arthur. He saw the subtle tightening of his jaw when the agent referred to his late wife's reading nook as a space that could be easily converted into a home office. He saw the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as a potential buyer casually picked up a framed photograph of a much younger Arthur in a crisp but unadorned military uniform. David was the observer, the audience surrogate, and his unease grew with each visit. He started noticing the details the others missed. The way Arthur, despite his limp, moved with an incredible economy of motion, a predator's grace. The way his eyes, calm and distant, seemed to see everything at once. And he kept seeing glimpses of the tattoo. Once, while Arthur was reaching for a book on a high shelf, his sleeve rolled up fully, revealing the coiled serpent and the sword in stark detail. David, whose grandfather had been a military history buff, felt a jolt of recognition. He wasn't sure from where, but the symbol felt important, dangerous. He went home that night and searched online, typing in military tattoo snake sword, but the results were a confusing jumble of generic insignia. Yet the image stuck with him. He knew it meant something. The antagonists, meanwhile, solidified their roles as ignorant foils. He's just losing it, Leo would say to Chloe over the phone. Staring into space like that, it's for his own good. Chloe would agree. We have to be strong for him. The assisted living place has a lovely garden. He'll be happier there. Their self-deception was absolute. They had reframed their greed as an act of compassion, their cruelty as a form of care. They were the heroes of their own story, rescuing their father from his own stubborn pride. The climax of this rising action came when they decided to force the issue by gaining control of his finances, the final step in proving his incompetence. They told him they needed to go to the bank to sort out some paperwork. Arthur, to their surprise, simply nodded. "All right," he said. His easy acquiescence puzzled them. They mistook it for surrender. It was, in fact, the calm before the storm. He was allowing them to walk deeper and deeper into their own trap. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this path they had chosen would not end where they thought it would. The decision to take him to the bank was the point of no return. For Leo and Chloe, it was a purely tactical move, the final piece of the puzzle that would grant them control. They envisioned a simple, sterile process. A few signatures, a conversation with a sympathetic bank manager, and the keys to their father's small but, to them, significant financial kingdom would be theirs. Their conversation on the drive to the city branch was a masterclass in self-congratulatory delusion. "It's really the last hurdle," Leo said, navigating his German luxury sedan through traffic with aggressive confidence. "Once we have signatory authority, we can ensure his bills are paid from the proceeds of the house sale and transition him smoothly." Jessica, his wife, seated in the back, added, "You're doing the right thing. He's lucky to have children who care so much." There was no irony in her voice. They had constructed a reality in which their actions were not just justified, but noble. Arthur sat in the passenger seat, silent, watching the city blur past. He was a still point in their spinning world of ambition and deceit. He wore a simple, clean collar shirt and gray trousers. He looked like 1,000 other elderly men, easily overlooked, easily dismissed. This anonymity, once a tool of his trade, now served a different purpose. It was a camouflage that would allow his children to walk, unhindered, to the edge of their own abyss. He felt no anger toward them, only a profound and weary sadness. He had given them life, provided for them, loved them. Yet, somewhere along the way, they had learned to value things over people, to see a parent as a balance sheet. He wondered if their mother, from whatever place she now resided, could see this. The thought was a sharper pain than the familiar ache in his leg. The bank was a temple of modern commerce, all glass and steel and cool, conditioned air. It was busy, filled with the quiet hum of transactions and the soft tapping of keyboards. Leo, exuding an air of importance, led the way to the private client's area, but was politely redirected by a young teller to the main queue. The small indignity grated on him. "We have an appointment," he said, his voice a touch too loud. The teller, a young woman named Sarah with bright, intelligent eyes, gave him a polite but firm smile. "I'm sure you do, sir, but you'll still need to wait your turn. We can help you right here when it's your turn." Chloe shot her a withering look. They were forced to stand in line, a minor inconvenience that felt, to them, like a major slight. Arthur stood patiently between them, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. It was in that queue that Sarah, the bank teller who would become the unwitting observer, first truly noticed the old man. She saw the contrast between his quiet patience and the agitated entitlement of his children. She saw the fine lines around his eyes, not just of age, but of a deep and abiding weariness. He seemed out of place, a figure from a different era, a black and white photograph in a world of garish color. When they finally reached her window, Leo took charge immediately, his tone condescending and dismissive of both Sarah and his own father. "We're here to discuss our father's accounts," he announced, gesturing vaguely at Arthur. "He's getting on in years, and we need to be added as signatories to his safety deposit box and checking accounts to help him manage things." He slid a stack of the legal documents Ms. Albright had prepared across the counter. Sarah looked from the paperwork to Arthur. She addressed him directly, her voice respectful. "Sir, is this what you like to do?" Before Arthur could answer, Chloe cut in. "He's a bit confused sometimes. It's all been discussed. Just process the paperwork." Arthur remained silent, but he met Sarah's gaze. In his eyes, she didn't see confusion. She saw a deep, clear intelligence. And something else, a profound stillness. As he rested his arm on the counter, his sleeve slid back an inch. For the first time, Sarah saw it clearly. The dark, intricate tattoo of a serpent coiled around a sword. It was faded, the lines blurred by time, but it was undeniably there. It seemed so at odds with the gentle, elderly man before her. A shiver of intrigue, of mystery, ran down her spine. This was more than a simple family financial matter. Something important was happening here, and she was on the front lines. The situation at the bank teller's window began to deteriorate quickly. Sarah, following protocol, examined the documents Leo had pushed at her. "I understand, sir," she said, her professional calm a stark contrast to Leo's growing impatience. "However, for me to add anyone to a safety deposit box, I need to speak with the box owner directly and have him sign the authorization card in my presence. I also need to verify his identity." She looked at Arthur. "Sir, may I please see your driver's license or another form of identification?" Leo let out an exasperated sigh. "For God's sake, we're right here. We're his identification. Can't you see he's not entirely with it? Just make it easy on him." This public declaration of his father's supposed incompetence was a new low. Several people in the adjacent lines turned to look. Arthur could feel their pity and curiosity. He said nothing. He simply reached into his back pocket, retrieved a worn leather wallet, and produced his driver's license. He slid across the counter to Sarah. She took it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was cool and dry. She looked at the license. Arthur Peterson. The photo was a man 10 years younger, but the eyes were the same, steady, clear, and ancient. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," she said, pointedly using his name. The bank manager, a portly, self-important man named Mr. Henderson, noticed a hold-up at Sarah's window and the small scene it was creating. He bustled over, his face a mask of managerial concern. "Is there a problem here, Sarah?" Leo seized the opportunity to appeal to a higher authority. "Yes, there is. We're trying to help our elderly father secure his finances, and your teller is being difficult." Mr. Henderson glanced at Arthur, his eyes taking in the simple clothes and the quiet demeanor, and immediately sided with the well-dressed, affluent children. He saw a liability, not a client. "I see," he said, turning his patronizing gaze on Arthur. "Sir, we are just trying to follow procedure. If you're feeling confused, perhaps it would be best to let your children handle this." It was a moment of profound public humiliation, to be spoken about as if he were an object, a senile old man who couldn't comprehend the world around him. Arthur felt a familiar coldness settle over him, the icy calm that had saved his life more times than he could count. He slowly drew his arm back on the counter, and in that moment, his sleeve pulled up past his wrist. Mr. Henderson's eyes flickered down, saw the faded tattoo, and a smirk touched his lips. "Okay, Rambo," he muttered, just loud enough for Arthur and Sarah to hear. "I'm going to need you to move along, sir. You're causing a disruption." Sarah gasped, her face flushing with anger at her boss's callousness. The insult, the final, dismissive jab, hung in the air. The manager was about to gesture for security guard, a bored-looking man leaning against a far wall. The stage was set for Arthur's complete and utter defeat. Leo and Chloe looked on, smug and victorious. They had won. They had proven him incompetent in a public forum. They would get what they wanted. But then, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The heavy glass doors of the bank swung open with a soft whoosh, but the sound seemed to echo like a cannon shot in the suddenly silent room. The energy in the space shifted instantly, dramatically. Every head, including Mr. Henderson's, turned toward the entrance. What they saw made the air crackle. It was a prelude to the reveal, the moment the world stops before it turns upside down. Into the sterile, transaction-driven environment of the bank walked a figure of such profound and absolute authority that the entire room fell into a stunned silence. It was a man in his late 60s, ramrod straight, his face a chiseled map of discipline and command. He wore the immaculate dress uniform of a 4-star general of the United States Army. The uniform itself was a sight to behold, a field of dark blue adorned with a constellation of ribbons and medals that spoke of a lifetime of service at the highest echelons of command. Each polished star on his shoulder seemed to capture and hold the light. He was flanked by two younger officers, a major and a captain, both wearing the expression of men who are utterly devoted to the man they serve, their eyes sweeping the room with a practiced, alert calm. The sound of their footsteps on the polished marble floor was the only noise in the bank. Click, clack, click. It was a sound of purpose, of weight, of history on the move. The board security guard instinctively straightened up, his hand twitching as if he wanted to salute but had forgotten how. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, froze, his mouth slightly agape, the condescending smirk wiped clean from his face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Leo and Chloe stared, their smug expressions dissolving into confusion, and then into a dawning sense of alarm. This was not part of their plan. This was an anomaly, a variable they could not account for. The general did not look at the manager. He did not look at the tellers. His gaze, sharp and piercing as an eagle's, scanned the room with a specific target in mind. For a heart-stopping moment, his eyes swept past Arthur, and then they snapped back, locking onto a quiet old man in the simple collared shirt. A flicker of something unreadable crossed the general's face. Recognition, relief, and an immense, profound respect. He ignored everyone else, the tableau of the stunned manager and the greedy children, and began to walk directly toward Arthur. His movement was not rushed, but it was unstoppable, a force of nature. The crowd of customers parted before him like the Red Sea. Sarah, the teller, stood mesmerized, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen anything like it. It was like a scene from a movie, yet it was terrifyingly real. The air in the bank was thick, heavy with unspoken questions. Who was this general? And why, in God's name, was he walking with such determined purpose toward the quiet, humiliated old man his children were trying to rob? Arthur, for his part, did not seem surprised. He simply stood, waiting, as the embodiment of the world he had left behind strode towards him. The coldness in him remained, but it was now joined by a flicker of something else, a deep, resonant echo of a shared past. The general stopped directly in front of Arthur, his polished black shoes inches from Arthur's worn leather ones. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. A silent conversation passed between them, a lifetime of understanding exchanged in a single glance. The two younger officers took up positions behind their general, standing in a perfect, formal parade rest. Then, in an act that sent a seismic shockwave through the entire bank, the four-star general, a man who had advised presidents and commanded armies, raised his right hand to his temple and executed the crispest, most respectful salute Mr. Henderson had ever seen. "Sergeant Major," the general said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute attention. "It's been a long time." The salute was a lightning flash. The monologue that followed was a thunder, rolling to the silent bank and shaking the foundations of Leo and Chloe's world. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, was paralyzed, his face a pale, sweating mask of disbelief. A four-star general saluting a sergeant major? It didn't compute. Ranks like that didn't just walk into his branch. Leo and Chloe were frozen in a state of cognitive dissonance, their brains refusing to process the scene before them. This was their father. Their simple, confused, incompetent father, and a general was saluting him. The general held the salute for a long, pregnant moment before dropping his hand. He then turned his steely gaze, first on the bank manager, Mr. Henderson. "You," the general said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its warmth and becoming a blade of ice. "You, in your infinite wisdom, just refer to this man as Rambo. Let me illuminate you." He took a small step closer, and Mr. Henderson involuntarily flinched. "You are currently in the presence of Sergeant Major Arthur Wraith Peterson, and the faded mark on his arm that you so casually mocked is the insignia of a unit that officially does not exist, a unit that I had the unparalleled honor of commanding from a distance, because men like me were not qualified to stand in the same room as operators like him." He gestured to the rows of ribbons on his own chest. "You see these? They are trinkets. They are given for service, for command, for being in the right place at the right time. This man," he said, turning his gaze back to Arthur with profound reverence, "has decorations that we couldn't pin on his uniform because the missions he conducted were so deeply classified they would never see the light of day. but I can tell you about the ones we could acknowledge. The general's voice became a resonant, powerful narrative, filling the silent space. He is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. 3 silver stars for valor that would make a lesser man's blood run cold. 4 bronze stars with the V device for heroism. 5 purple hearts for wounds received in combat, the last of which gave him the limp you probably dismissed as old age. The general took a breath, his eyes locking with Leo and Chloe's. That limp? He got that pulling his entire team out of a compromised embassy in West Africa. He took 3 rounds of the leg but refused to be evacuated until every single diplomat, every clerk, every single Marine guard was on the last chopper out. He was the last man to leave, covering their exit. He then pointed a single, steady finger at them. You, his children. Did he ever tell you about the time he spent 2 weeks behind enemy lines in the Panjshir Valley with no food, no support, evading capture while carrying a wounded teammate to safety? Did he tell you that his teammate was my son? He saved my boy's life. He carried him on his back for 50 miles. Did he ever mention that? Leo and Chloe could only shake their heads, their faces ashen. They looked at their father as if seeing him for the first time. They saw not a frail old man, but a giant. The general wasn't finished. No, he wouldn't have told you, because men like Sergeant Major Peterson don't talk. They do. They sacrifice. They endure. And they do it not for glory, not for thanks, but because it is right. They build a wall of fire and steel around this country so that people like you, his gaze swept over the entire bank, can live your lives in peace, worry about stock portfolios and interest rates, so that men like you, his eyes drilled back into Mr. Henderson, can sit in your comfortable chairs and pass judgment on your betters. He turned back to Arthur, his voice softening again. We have a network, Sergeant Major, a quiet one, for members of the unit. When your name was flagged in a financial system inquiry alongside terms like power of attorney and mental incompetence, it sent up a red flag. I was in town for a conference. I came myself. He paused. We take care of our own. The monologue was complete. The reveal was absolute. The power dynamic of the room had not just shifted. It had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. Arthur Peterson was not who they thought he was. He was a hero, a legend, and they had tried to dishonor him. The silence that followed the general's words was a living thing. It was thick with shame, shock, and a terrible, clarifying awe. Every person in that bank, from the customers in line to the tellers behind the counter, looked at Arthur Peterson with new eyes. They saw the quiet dignity not as weakness, but as a profound calm of a man who had faced the worst of humanity and retained his own. They saw the limp not as a sign of frailty, but as a badge of honor, paid for in blood. Leo and Chloe stood as if turned to stone, the architects of their own humiliation. The color had drained from their faces, leaving them looking pale and brittle. Their expensive clothes suddenly seemed like cheap costumes, their air of sophisticated entitlement exposed as nothing more than childish arrogance. Chloe's eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, but of pure, unadulterated shame. The public nature of their exposure was a wound from which her pride would never recover. Leo stared at the floor, unable to meet his father's gaze, unable to look at the general whose words had just dismantled his entire sense of self. He was a success, a titan of his small financial world. Yet in that moment, he had never felt smaller. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, looked as if he might faint. He opened his mouth to apologize, to say something, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? His casual cruelty, his smug dismissal, had been laid bare in front of his staff and customers. He was a fool, and he knew it. Sarah, the young teller, felt tears welling in her own eyes, but hers were tears of vindication, of a righteous and uplifting awe. She looked at Arthur, this quiet, unassuming hero, and felt a powerful surge of respect and gratitude. She had been the only one to show him basic human decency, and in that moment, it felt like the most important thing she had ever done. The general, his duty done, turned his full attention back to Arthur. The hardness left his face, replaced by a genuine, brotherly concern. Arthur, he said, his voice now gentle, if you need anything, a place to stay. legal counsel, anything. You have only to ask. Arthur, the quiet hero, finally spoke. He looked not at his shattered children, but at his old commander. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "I'm all right, General," he said, his voice quiet but clear. It was the voice of a man who was, and had always been, in complete control of himself. Then he did something that sealed his quiet victory. He reached across the counter and gently took the paperwork, the power of attorney forms, the contracts, from Sarah's desk. Without looking at them, he tore the sheaf of papers in half, then in half again, the sound of ripping paper unnaturally loud in the silent room. He dropped the pieces into a nearby trash can. It was a final, definitive act. He needed no one to speak for him. His honor was restored. He gave a slight, respectful nod to the general. It was a dismissal, a thank you and goodbye all in one. Then he turned and, with his steady, rhythmic limp, walked out of the bank. He didn't look back at his children. He didn't look at the stunned crowd. He simply left, a quiet man walking back to his quiet life, his dignity intact, his strength proven not by shouting, but by the silent weight of his own history. He had been vindicated, but he remained humble, leaving the noise and the shame behind him. The resolution was not in the shouting, but in the silence Arthur left behind. As he walked out into the sunlight, leaving the wreckage of his children's greed in his wake, a profound lesson settled over the room. The narrator's voice returns, a reflective and somber guide to the moral of this modern-day fable. We look for heroes in the headlines, on the silver screen, in the stories of the rich and famous. We are taught to equate worth with volume, success with visibility. But the truest heroes, the pillars that hold up the very foundations of our world, often walk in silence. They wear no uniforms. They seek no accolades. They ask for no recognition. They are the Arthur Petersons of the world, the quiet men and women who have paid a price we can never comprehend, and who ask for nothing in return but to live their lives in the quiet dignity they have so dearly earned. They are our neighbors, our grandparents, the stranger holding the door for us. Their heroism is not a performance. It is the very fabric of their character. Inside the bank, Leo and Chloe were left to drown in the quiet judgment of the room. There was no grand confrontation, no tearful reconciliation. Their punishment was to simply exist in the space their father had vacated, to see themselves reflected in the shocked and disappointed eyes of complete strangers. The general and his aides departed as quietly as they had arrived, leaving the family to their own private reckoning. What happens to children who discover their father is a giant, long after they have treated him like a stone in their shoe. Can that chasm of disrespect ever be bridged? Perhaps, in time, they might find a path to redemption, but it would be a long and arduous journey, one that would require them to dismantle the very core of who they had become. But this story is not about their redemption. It is about Arthur's vindication. It is a reminder that honor is not something that can be given or taken away by others. It is a fire that burns within. It is a quiet, internal knowledge of a life lived with purpose and integrity. The world can be a loud and often cruel place. It is easy to judge by appearances, to dismiss the quiet and the humble. But how many legends do we walk past every day, completely unaware of the greatness in our midst? We want to pose a question to you, our community. Look around at your own life, at the people in your orbit. Is there a quiet hero among you whose story you have never taken the time to learn? What is the true measure of a person's worth? Is it found in their bank account, in their job title, or in the silent, unseen sacrifices they have made for others? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, because it is in these shared reflections that we find our common humanity. For more stories that challenge our perspectives and inspire us to look deeper, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You never know when the next revelation is waiting just around the corner, ready to remind us that the most powerful truths are often the ones spoken in the quietest voice.